What keeps a state standing when centuries grind it down? How can a city become an idea? Why do some empires fall while one simply endures? In Byzantium, you can hear the archive breathe and feel dust lift from sealed ink. From the 3rd to the 11th century, the empire survived by design rather than by luck. It treated power as a craft practiced under pressure, and it measured victory in seasons gained and in crises diffused before they could become collapse. Constantinople became the stone heart of that craft, and it refused to go silent. Here is the claim. Byzantium endured because it mastered diplomacy, money, and controlled adaptation. It fought with armies when it had to, yet it ruled with instruments that outlasted armies. It turned negotiation into strategy and finance into force. It turned walls and reform into one discipline of endurance, and that discipline became its signature. This is how a wounded empire kept walking. After the Western Empire collapsed, the Eastern court faced a longer siege of history. Persia pressed at the frontier and demanded tribute of blood and borderland. Plague thinned the streets and made even victory feel fragile. Then fear entered the granaries, while tremors rebuilt cities into humility. New powers formed beyond the deserts, and came with new political gravity as raids arrived by sea and river and steppe road to test every hinge of the frontier. Emperors rose in ceremony and fell in corridor shadow as factions traded loyalties like knives, while provinces were lost, then reclaimed, then lost again. Constantinople kept the ledger of continuity and guarded bureaucracy and church and law in a single breath and taught the empire to think in systems. First came diplomacy as the quiet engine of time. Envoys moved faster than armies and carried titles and silk and deliberate praise. Promises were written to sound generous while they remained binding, and alliances were framed as honor while they served as leverage through language, as careful as armor. Marriages linked courts, hostages sat at banquets as living guarantees that no treaty was merely a line on parchment. One neighbor was drawn close, so another neighbor would drift away, and rivals were redirected until they tired of marching. Treaties chose the season of war by delaying it, and delay saved men and grain and morale. Those saved resources became planning capacity for the next crisis and made survival repeatable across generations. Diplomacy bought time, and time kept the state alive. Second came money, as a language every frontier understood. The solidus traveled with a reputation that did not rust in foreign hands, and its weight became a quiet oath, repeated in markets from Italy to the Levant. Tax registers measured fields and ports with cold clarity, then converted harvest into pay, and pay into obedience. Gold hired mercenaries and funded fleets and repaired walls after fires, so violence could be met with readiness rather than panic. The treasury quieted an ambitious general before he could gather banners, and it steadied allies before they could waver. Markets in Constantinople mirrored the world and turned trade into information and rumor into warning. Merchants became witnesses of imperial order because order protected profit and profit rewarded the city. Byzantium became a financial powerhouse that could fight with accounts and rebuild, while others begged for breathing room. Sometimes the coin won the first battle before the spear was raised. Third came controlled adaptation. Defended by stone, the Theodosian walls made time physical and forced invaders to bargain with patience. Sea chains sealed the harbors, and towers watched every approach, so surprise turned into effort, and effort turned into delay. A siege became a contest of logistics rather than a single heroic clash, and the city turned hunger into a weapon of waiting by ration and discipline and relentless repair. Inside the walls, the state kept working while the enemy waited outside, and the imperial machine refused to pause. Judges wrote, and clerks counted, and priests chanted under the same roofline, while the rhythm of order mocked the besieger. Beyond the walls, armies were reorganized into local themes, so defense could be immediate and leadership could be close to danger. Command became regional, and response became faster as the state learned to fight with geography and weather and distance. Reform stayed limited, so the center did not fracture. Change was allowed, but chaos was refused. The empire shifted shape, yet it did not dissolve, and that restraint was as important as courage. These tools did not stand alone, and they reinforced one another. Diplomacy created space for reform, and money supplied the means for walls and fleets. Walls protected the treasury and the archives, and protected the idea of the capital as the last lamp in a storm. When frontiers narrowed, the empire narrowed its dreams and traded universal reach for defensible horizons. Arab expansion shifted the southern sea into a harsher border and forced the state to rewrite its map in salt and blood. Bulgar power hardened the northern road into a corridor of risk and made diplomacy as vital as swords. Old cities fell and new strongholds rose, and the provinces learned to live as fortresses that could endure winter and siege alike. The state grew smaller and tougher and more suspicious, while it held to ceremony as proof of legitimacy. Its universal claim remained, but its map became a stubborn outline that refused to be erased. By the 11th century, new storms gathered at the edges. Norman force tested the west, and Turkic movement threatened Anatolia, and both pressures demanded faster decisions. Court rivalry returned, with sharper hunger, and turned energy inward, yet the administrative spine still held. Even so, the Byzantine lesson stood in the open, for any later age to read and to reuse. A state can outlast chaos by mastering procedure and patience, and by refusing to panic. A capital can be a fortress, and a ledger at once, and it can make time into a weapon. If the next chapter, the Franks in the early Middle Ages, interests you, stay with us. The archive will open. Once again next time. Hold that craft close when you watch other empires rise. Let history speak again, and keep your eyes awake